I caught my husband with his mistress in Hawaii when they thought I was at home caring for his disabled sister. The entire restaurant witnessed him being dragged out. This morning, he was on his knees outside my house, desperately begging for food. Anyone who has ever said that truth is stranger than fiction must have witnessed my marriage collapse in this unbelievable way. I still vividly remember that moment, standing in the middle of that upscale restaurant in Hawaii, facing Bowden's horrified expression, my beloved husband. He and his family were sitting there with some strange woman, while I was supposed to be halfway around the world, caring for his bedridden, mute sister. At least, that's what they thought. But fate has its strange ways of turning things around. And sometimes, the greatest betrayal brings the greatest opportunity for liberation. My name is Aini, and I'm 27 years old. Like many young girls, I once dreamed of becoming a pop star, shining on stage with hit songs. In my beautiful early 20s, I couldn't imagine living an ordinary life, the kind my mother always wished for me, having a good husband, lovely children, and a happy home. But then harsh reality hit. My music dreams gradually faded as I faced fierce competition and doors slamming shut. Instead of a stage bathed in bright lights, I ended up in a boring bank office after graduating college with a finance degree, the safe choice my parents had convinced me to pursue. Having a stable job is important, my mother would often remind me. You can't live on far-fetched dreams forever. When I was almost 25, my mother began constantly asking about my dating life. Every phone call inevitably included the question, when am I going to have grandchildren to hold? It was mental pressure that I never admitted affected my decisions, but deep down, I knew it did. Bowden entered my life like an answer to my mother's prayers. A mutual friend introduced us at a cocktail party. Bowden was tall, handsome, and worked for a prestigious trading company in Manhattan. He wore perfectly tailored suits, laughed confidently, and talked about his work with a passion I once had when talking about music. I once wanted to work in the entertainment industry, Bowden shared during our first date, which surprised me. But my parents didn't support it, and then I realized that making money was more practical than chasing pipe dreams. That created a deep connection between us, or at least I thought it did. Two artistic souls trapped in the practical world, sharing dead dreams over martinis and laughter. I saw myself in him, and perhaps that was the most dangerous thing. Have you thought about marriage? Bowden asked one day, after we'd been dating for about 6 months. Occasionally, I answered, trying not to reveal that my mother had been calling daily to ask about that handsome man and when we would take the relationship to the next level. Bowden smiled. I think we'd be great together. And so we dated seriously, then got engaged, and finally married in a small but elegant ceremony that Bowden had carefully planned. I even quit my job at the bank after we got married. Bowden earned enough for both of us, he said, and I could focus on creating a home. I didn't know that creating a home actually meant becoming his unpaid servant. The first few months of marriage were perfect. Bowden was thoughtful, always bringing home little gifts, and listening to me talk about my day. If I didn't feel well and wanted to eat out, he would happily agree. If I admired a designer bag as we walked past shops, he would secretly buy it and surprise me with it a month later. I thought I had found my Prince Charming. But then I met his family. Bowden drove me to visit his parents in Nebraska one weekend. Their house was large and cozy, situated in the suburbs with a spacious backyard. Mom is a bit particular, Bowden warned as we walked up the driveway. But she'll warm up to you. True to his word, Evelyn, Bowden's mother, was a difficult woman. From the first glance, I could feel the harsh judgment from her cold eyes. Hello, I greeted her with my widest smile. Bowden has told me so much about you. She responded, not bothering to hide her scrutiny of me from head to toe. You mean Bodney has told you a lot about me? Bodney? I looked at Bowden in surprise. My full name is Bodney Prescott of Ingham III, he mumbled, his face turning red. I prefer Bowden. I don't understand why you're embarrassed about your name, Evelyn said. It was your grandfather's name, a great man. The conversation continued in that direction, Bowden's mother barely looking at me, only talking to her son as if I wasn't there. However, what surprised me most was when I learned about Bowden's sister, Kalista. Let me show you Bodney's sister, Evelyn finally said to me. That's Kalista. Encephalitis when she was young. Very sad. We walked to a spacious room on the ground floor. When Evelyn opened the door, I saw a young woman, perhaps around 20, lying in bed. Her face lit up when she saw us enter. Kalista, this is Aini, your brother's wife, Evelyn said, her voice softer when speaking to her daughter. Kalista smiled at me, and I immediately felt a connection. Although she couldn't speak, her eyes expressed an intelligence and warmth I didn't see in her mother. Hello, Kalista. Bowden has told me about you, I said, moving closer to the bed. Kalista raised her hands and began moving them in ways I recognized as sign language. I didn't understand, but Evelyn translated. She says she's happy to meet you, she said. She's been waiting to meet who Bodni married. I smiled at Kalista. Me too. I hope we can become good friends. Evelyn sniffed slightly. She doesn't have many friends. It's quite difficult when she can't speak and is bedridden. That broke my heart. Though I didn't know much about Kalista, I could see the intelligence and desire for connection in her eyes. I decided to spend time with her during this visit. And I did. While Bowden and his father talked business, and his mother did housework, I sat with Kalista. I found a basic sign language book in their home library and began learning. I'm learning sign language, I signed clumsily to Kalista after a few hours. Her eyes widened with excitement, and she began signing slowly so I could understand. You are wonderful, she signed. I want to talk with you, I replied, feeling proud of my new skills. Kalista beamed, and I felt a genuine connection with her. For the rest of the visit, I spent as much time as possible with her, learning sign language and simply chatting. I even mischievously signed, "We're like old friends who've known each other for a long time, aren't we?" She smiled and signed back, "Yes, let's always be good friends." I happily signed back, "Of course." When I said goodbye to Kalista at the end of the visit, I promised to return soon. I kept that promise in the early months of marriage, often accompanying Bowden to visit his family and spending time with Kalista. I even learned full sign language to communicate with her without translation. Strangely, though, Evelyn's attitude toward me didn't improve, no matter how hard I tried. She always found something to criticize. "Bod's shoes are filthy. You know, a man's shoes say a lot about his work. Keeping them clean is your job," she scolded me once. Another time, "Remember to fold the clothes neatly. Otherwise, Bodni will be upset. And remember never to go to bed before Bodni, even if he tells you it's okay." The truth was, Bowden had never complained about any of these things. He even told me he liked how I kept things a little messy. It made our apartment feel like a real home instead of a showroom. But gradually, his mother's criticisms began changing how Bowden viewed me. I'm not sure exactly when things started to change, but about a year into our marriage, I began noticing differences in Bowden. He started coming home late and often smelling of alcohol. He complained about little things that had never bothered him before, the way I folded his shirts, the way I cooked, even the way I laughed. "I don't understand why you have to laugh so loudly," he said once, after we returned from an evening with friends. "You sound like a seagull. It's annoying." I tried to ignore comments like that, telling myself it was just pressure from his job. But then he started not inviting me to visit his family anymore, which I found odd. "It's just a quick visit," he'd say when I asked. "I'll go and come back in the same day. No need to bother you." But these quick visits started becoming more frequent, sometimes lasting entire weekends. And each time he returned, I felt him becoming more distant. One day, I confronted him. "Bowden, you've been so distant lately. You hardly talk to me anymore. I feel like you're not the same person." He glared at me for a second, then coldly replied, "That's not true. You're overthinking." I wasn't going to let it go that easily. "I don't think so. You've changed, Bowden." But he ended the conversation with, "Don't bring this up again." Then he walked away, leaving me standing there confused and hurt. Our marriage continued to deteriorate in the following months. I wondered if he was having an affair, but there was no concrete evidence beyond his absences and distance. Sometimes I thought about leaving, but I had quit my job after getting married and felt financially trapped. Then, one day, Bowden said something that genuinely surprised me. "I'm going to my parents this Sunday. What are your plans?" I could hardly believe my ears. He had been going there alone for months. I quickly asked, "Can I come with you this time?" He sighed and said, "That's why I'm asking." Of course, I jumped at the chance to go along. "I'd love to. I miss Kalista." Bowden didn't seem too happy about that, and I noticed a slight sneer when I mentioned his sister. "Yeah, you and Kalista get along great, don't you?" he said. "Yes. I feel like we've been good friends for a long time," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. On Sunday, we drove to his parents. I had bought a box of pastries for his mother, hoping it would smooth our relationship. When we arrived, it was clear Evelyn wasn't happy to see me. She took the box with a frown and said, "Oh, these again? They're quite boring, but if you insist, I'll eat them." I swallowed my disappointment and told myself that at least I'd get to see Kalista. But before I could go find her, Bowden asked about his father. "Where's Dad?" "He's in a meeting." "Why?" Do you need something? Evelyn replied. Nothing, I just wanted to talk to Dad, Bowden answered. I hadn't heard about this conversation Bowden wanted to have with his father, so I asked, do you have something important to discuss? Bowden glanced at me and said, it's none of your business. That really hurt and annoyed me. What do you mean? We're married, of course it's my business. But before Bowden could answer, his mother interjected, that's right. If Bowden doesn't want to share something with you, then stop nagging. I remained silent, knowing arguing was pointless. Right then, Kalista appeared at the door, and when she saw us, she smiled brightly. I rushed to her, relieved to see a friendly face. Hi Kalista. I've missed you so much. She signed quickly to me, and I understood she had missed me too. We went to her room, where I could escape the tension with Bowden and his mother. Once we were alone, Kalista began signing faster, her fingers dancing in the air. Long time no see, how are you? She signed to me. I'm good, I signed back. Bowden said I could come today, though it's strange because he's been coming alone for months. Kalista's face turned serious. My brother is always hiding something. He's never been an open person, she signed. Then, she mentioned that Bowden and the rest of the family were planning a trip to Hawaii. I was completely surprised. Hawaii? He hasn't said a word to me about that. Kalista looked uncomfortable. I hope I haven't said something I shouldn't. No, I reassured her. He just hasn't told me anything. When are they going? Next week. But I'll stay behind, she added with a grin. I don't have a passport. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. My husband was planning a trip to Hawaii and hadn't even mentioned it to me? That wasn't just disrespectful, it was a clear sign that our marriage was in more serious trouble than I thought. On the drive home, I tried to control my emotions and didn't mention Hawaii. I wanted to see if Bowden would actually tell me about it, or if he was planning to go without saying a word to me. 2 days later, Bowden finally brought up the issue, but not in the way I expected. Aini, I need to tell you something, Bowden said after dinner, his voice suddenly unusually serious. I'm planning to take the whole family on a trip to Hawaii. My heart tightened. So he was finally mentioning it. Oh? I tried to keep my voice normal. Sounds exciting. When are we going? Bowden looked at me strangely. Actually, I need you to stay behind to take care of Kalista. I froze. So that was the plan, not to take me along, but to push me aside to care for his sister while he vacationed in Hawaii with his family. I'm sorry? I think I misheard. Kalista can't travel in her condition, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And my mother needs a break after years of caring for her. You get along well with Kalista, and you don't work, so it would make sense for you to take care of her for a week. I couldn't believe my ears. He was going on vacation in Hawaii and leaving me behind alone to care for his bedridden sister? Bowden, I'm your wife, not your family's private nurse. If your mother needs a break, your family should hire a professional caregiver. It's not about money. He protested. It's about trust. My mother wouldn't trust Kalista with a stranger. But she'd trust her with me, someone she can barely look in the eye? I started feeling my temple pulse with anger. Or are you looking for a way to exclude me from the trip? Don't be ridiculous, Bowden frowned. This is a family vacation. I don't need you tagging along every time I go somewhere. But I am your family, I said, my voice rising. I'm your wife. I'm not an employee you can just order around. The argument continued all evening, but in the end, I understood that Bowden wouldn't change his mind. Feeling hurt and betrayed, I slept on the couch, tears rolling down my cheeks. A few days later, Bowden announced that we would go to his parents on Sunday, right before they left for Hawaii, so he could prepare me to care for Kalista. When we arrived, the atmosphere was strange. Bowden's mother looked unusually excited, and I even caught a smile on her face when she thought I wasn't looking. His father didn't seem to be there, as usual. Bowden formally proposed the Hawaii family trip, even though it turned out to be a pre-existing plan. What about you, little sister? He asked his bedridden, mute sister Kalista, as if she actually had a choice. She shrugged and replied in sign language, I'll pass. I don't have a passport. I was a bit surprised. Bowden was always busy with work, so it was strange to hear him planning a vacation. Bowden, is everything okay at work? I asked, still wondering about this sudden plan. Everything's fine. I wouldn't suggest this if work wasn't going well, he replied, slightly annoyed. His mother, who always seemed displeased with me, glanced over and added, you shouldn't interfere with Bowden's decisions. You're being too nosy. Then, Bowden dropped a bombshell, actually, Aini, the real reason I brought you here is because I want you to take care of Kalista while we're away. I was a little startled, but quickly realized that staying with Kalista would be much better than being stuck in Hawaii with my mother-in-law. Alright, I'll take care of Kalista, I agreed, though it hurt a little that Bowden hadn't even considered taking me along. But you didn't need to drag me here just to tell me that. Well, Bowden said, I thought if I told you in front of my mother, you'd be less resistant. He knew I might be upset about not going to Hawaii, and his mother would back him up if I tried to argue. It was clear they had planned this together, and I felt somewhat cornered. After the conversation ended, I went to Kalista's room. She was lying in bed but brightened when she saw me. Long time no see, how are you? She signed to me. I'm good, I signed back. Bowden brought me today, though it's strange because he's been coming alone for months. Kalista's face turned serious. My brother is always hiding something. He's never been an open person, she signed. Then, she mentioned that Bowden and the rest of the family were planning a trip to Hawaii. But I'll stay behind, she added with a grin showing she was completely fine with that. We continued chatting, and I really enjoyed our time together. I always wondered why Kalista and her mother were so different, and now things were starting to make sense. A few hours later, Bowden came to get me and we drove home. As I left, Kalista winked mischievously at me and hinted at something bigger, saying, I'll tell you soon. The day to leave for Hawaii quickly arrived. Bowden and I went to his parents' house, but while the rest of the family was packing for their flight, I was preparing to stay with Kalista for a week. I brought my luggage to Kalista's room, and she welcomed me with excitement. It's happening. She signed with a mischievous smile. When I returned to the living room, Bowden's family was preparing to leave. His voice rose above everyone else's as he reminded me, taking care of Kalista is your responsibility. Don't be negligent. Even my mother-in-law chimed in, remember to get along with Kalista. Staying here is better for you. Then she added something that made me grit my teeth, if anything happens to Kalista, it will be your fault. We will hold you responsible. I couldn't believe the audacity of a family abandoning their disabled daughter to go on vacation while blaming me for anything that might happen, but I said nothing and returned to Kalista's room, not wanting to deal with them anymore. As soon as I entered, Kalista jumped up from her bed with more energy than ever. Come on, let's go, she said, breaking the silence I had grown so accustomed to. I froze, my mind spinning. What I said next showed my complete shock. Kalista? Kalista giggled, I told you, I can actually walk, and I can talk too. Since when? I asked, still in disbelief. About a year ago, I think, she replied casually. Why have you been hiding this from everyone? With a calm expression, Kalista began explaining everything. Actually, there's something you don't know. Both my dad and mom are remarried. I'm dad's child from his first wife, while my brother and sister are mom's children. Suddenly many things became clear, her mother's coldness, the way she was treated as a burden, it all fit together. I had that feeling, I admitted. Yes, Kalista continued. Mom doesn't like me, and I don't want to deal with her, so I pretended I couldn't talk or walk. But Dad knows everything. He's always supported me. As I was digesting what she said, Kalista dropped another bombshell. That's why I decided we're also going to Hawaii. What? I asked, completely confused. You mean today? Yes. We'll even be at the same resort as Bowden and his family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Wait, I'd love to go with you, Kalista, but do you have a passport? Of course. I secretly got a passport last month. And don't worry about money, Dad will pay for everything, the flights, the resort, even your ticket. I was stunned. I see, maybe we really are going to Hawaii. And that's how we got to where we are now. Kalista and I took a taxi to the airport, and when we arrived, her father was waiting to see us off. Aini, I know this must be shocking for you, but I hope you enjoy this trip, he said kindly. Thank you, I replied, still a bit overwhelmed by everything. I feel bad that you're paying for all the expenses. Don't worry about that, he reassured me. As long as you two have a good time, I'm happy about it. We boarded our plane, on a different airline than Bowden's family of course, and arrived in Hawaii early the next morning. We checked into the resort hotel, where Kalista and I shared a room, both full of excitement for the adventure ahead. I happened to mention to Kalista, your dad seems to have traveled a lot. Yes, he's had many international business trips, even to Hawaii several times, she replied. So, what's the plan? I asked, curious about what she had in mind. Kalista smirked, I guess Mom and everyone will have dinner at the restaurant tonight. I think it's time for a little surprise. I giggled, excited at the thought. Sounds fun. But we should rest first, we both need to shake off the jet lag. Good idea, Kalista agreed. I couldn't nap on the plane. We showered and climbed into bed, quickly falling into much-needed sleep. When we woke up, it was late afternoon, nearly 4 o'clock. Kalista was already up and applying makeup when I stirred awake. Sorry, I overslept, I apologized. It's okay, I just woke up too, Kalista reassured me. We both needed that. Now we're recharged and ready to go. Around 7 o'clock, I said to Kalista, I'll go down to the restaurant to check things out. I snuck down to the restaurant, hiding myself in the shadows near the entrance. As I scanned the room looking for Bowden and his family, there they were, sitting happily at a table in the far corner. I moved a little closer to get a better look and noticed something shocking. A young woman was with them, one I didn't recognize. This woman hadn't been there when they left Bowden's parents' house, and I almost gasped in surprise. My heart pounded as I crept closer, hiding behind a large decorative partition so I could hear their conversation. I'm glad that girl isn't here tonight, my mother-in-law muttered, loud enough for me to hear. I really got a bad deal with her. She taints our family. I felt like someone had slapped me in the face, but the worst was yet to come. Bowden's voice continued, his tone contemptuous. I want to divorce her and start over. I'll find a reason and squeeze every penny out of her. I had to cover my mouth to keep from crying out. My husband, the man I had slept with, cooked for, and loved for the past 2 years, was plotting to divorce me and take all my money. My mother-in-law added, even if you don't have a legitimate reason, we can make one up. She's a bad match, wish I could throw her in the trash. The strange woman, perhaps a few years younger than me and expensively dressed, giggled. You told me about how she used to want to be a singer. So ridiculous. Bowden laughed shortly. Yes, I made a huge mistake. You know, all I want is a woman who knows her place, who takes care of me properly. Not some self-important person who thinks she can argue with me whenever I make a decision. Look at what our family has been through, my mother-in-law sighed. If my daughter knew, she'd be so upset. Good thing she's still in the institution. I frowned. Daughter? Bowden had never mentioned having a sister. He always said Kalista was his only sibling. Yes, lucky indeed, Bowden agreed. Mom, when do you think she'll get out of the institution? Not soon, his mother replied. After everything she's done, after all the betrayal. They continued talking, and I stood frozen in shock, barely able to process what I was hearing. They were talking about my marriage like a failed business deal, and apparently the whole family was keeping a secret about another sister locked away in some institution? What was going on with this bizarre family? But I had heard enough. I snuck back to our room, my heart racing with anger. When I returned, Kalista looked up at me. That took a while, what happened? She asked, noticing my pale face. I saw something shocking, I whispered, still trying to process what I'd overheard. Bowden brought a woman I've never seen before, and they're talking about divorcing me. Kalista's mouth dropped open. What? That's horrible. I nodded, though a strange calmness had settled over me. Honestly, I feel relieved. Now that I've seen him with someone else, I'm ready to move on. I can finally divorce him. Kalista grinned. That's great. So, shall we go make our appearance? With a mischievous smile, we headed to the restaurant. I felt my heart racing as we entered, but I also felt a strange excitement. After months of feeling powerless in my marriage, I was finally taking control. We asked to be seated near Bowden's table, and the waitress found us a spot close enough to hear everything. They were still immersed in their conversation, unaware of our presence. The insults about me continued, and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at how endlessly they could badmouth me. Mom thinks once the divorce is finalized, you should make it official with Jane, Bowden's mother said, nodding toward the young woman. She'll be a much better wife than that girl. Kalista caught my eye and nodded, our signal to begin the counterattack. I stood up and walked straight to their table, my voice loud and clear. Are you all having fun? The shock on Bowden's face was priceless. His mouth hung open, and my mother-in-law's eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, they were completely frozen. Finally, my mother-in-law broke the silence. What are you doing here? And how is Kalista here without her wheelchair? Kalista stood up with a confident smile. I don't need a wheelchair anymore. The entire room seemed to stand still as they processed her words. Bowden and his mother stared at Kalista in stunned silence. Thanks to you both, Kalista continued with a sharp smile, I've regained my ability to walk and talk. I must have caused you so much trouble over the years, but I'm fine now. When did you start talking again? My mother-in-law stammered, her face turning pale. Maybe about a year ago, Kalista replied casually. Why didn't you tell us? Bowden asked, still in shock. Because it was easier for me if everyone thought I was still mute, Kalista said directly. And besides, I heard what you've been saying about Aini. My mother-in-law's face was as white as paper. What do you mean? She asked, trying to recover. We haven't said anything bad about you, Aini. Bowden tried to lie. That's right, I would never. Really? I said, pulling out my phone, because I recorded everything. Want to hear it? I hadn't actually recorded anything, but they didn't need to know that. It was just a bluff, but it worked. Bowden's face twisted with anger. Aini, you're just causing trouble for me. Now you're making these ridiculous accusations. I met his anger with cool determination. As soon as we get back, I'm contacting my lawyer to start divorce proceedings, and you can't deny what you've done. You're on vacation with another woman, plotting to divorce me, plus you called marrying me a cursed lottery ticket, so I'm demanding compensation for that insult. The young woman, Jane, started to feel uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. I turned my attention to her. And you, Jane, is it? I don't know who you are, but I hope you think carefully about getting involved with a married man. It's not just an ethical issue, it could be a legal problem. My mother-in-law, realizing they had been caught, tried to change her tone. Dear Aini, I've always cared for you. Let's try to work this out with Bowden. This woman means nothing to him. I wasn't having it. I'm sorry, but I can't live with a man who considers me a cursed lottery ticket. Enjoy your time with this woman, and don't be surprised if I demand compensation from her too. The other woman, now pale and trembling, looked terrified. Bowden, desperate, fell to his knees. Aini, please don't make a big deal out of this. My company has strict policies. I shook my head, not impressed by his pleading. You don't seem sorry at all, I stood firm and answered Bowden, who was visibly shaking now, but he still wasn't giving up. Aini, I beg you, please forgive me. If my company finds out, I'll lose my job, he begged, desperation creeping into his voice. Though his panic was evident, I remained unmoved. You should have thought about that before, I said coldly. You're married, yet you're in Hawaii with another woman. I will never forgive you. Hearing my harsh words, my mother-in-law collapsed beside Bowden, her tears flowing freely. Please, Aini, forgive my son, she begged, her voice trembling with emotion. By now the entire restaurant was watching us. The scene we were creating was drawing attention, and the manager started approaching our table. I stood up, not wanting to continue this spectacle. Kalista and I will go back to our room now. Enjoy the rest of your Hawaiian vacation, I said coldly. I imagine things will get a bit more complicated when you return home. Bowden, now sobbing uncontrollably, shouted, Please forgive me. I can't afford to pay any compensation. His outburst made the restaurant manager frown. The manager said something to a nearby staff member, and then politely but firmly told Bowden he was disturbing other guests and needed to leave. Bowden, still in shock, didn't seem to understand the message, and soon, 2 large security guards appeared. Without much effort, they dragged Bowden out of the restaurant. Though Bowden struggled and cried, he was no match for their strength. The entire restaurant watched as Bowden was dragged outside, with some guests even applauding. I couldn't help but smile. It felt sweet to see the cheater brought down. My mother-in-law and Jane sat stunned, their expressions a mixture of shock and embarrassment. Kalista and I exchanged surprised looks at how things had escalated, but I couldn't help feeling that Bowden had gotten exactly what he deserved. A week later, Kalista and I returned home. I heard that Bowden had been released shortly after being thrown out of the restaurant, but he had been in a state of shock for the rest of the trip, keeping silent. That didn't bother me at all. The very next day after returning, I went to a law firm where an old college friend worked. Unfortunately, my friend wasn't there, but I was assigned a friendly female lawyer. I explained everything that had happened, the infidelity, the lies, and the hurtful comments. After listening carefully, she assured me that not only was divorce possible, but I could also demand alimony from Bowden. She also said she would investigate the woman who had been with Bowden in Hawaii to see if I could claim compensation from her. A month later, the lawyer contacted me with news. It had been proven that Bowden had been involved with the other woman for about 6 months. This allowed me to demand compensation from her. Without hesitation, I asked my lawyer, please get as much alimony as possible from both Bowden and that woman. She smiled and nodded reassuringly. 2 months later, the divorce was finally completed, and soon after, a hefty alimony payment from both Bowden and his mistress was deposited into my account. Looking at the amount, I couldn't help but mutter, well, that's karma for calling me a blank lottery ticket. Meanwhile, I stayed in touch with Kalista, who had become a true friend. she told me that after the Hawaii incident, everything had changed completely in her family. Her father had finally divorced Evelyn, who had treated Kalista badly for years. Bowden not only lost his family's respect but also lost his job when his company discovered the Hawaii scandal. 3 months later, out of nowhere, Bowden and my mother-in-law showed up at my door. What surprised me was that both looked gaunt, having lost significant weight. Their once proud, confident faces now appeared emaciated and hollow. I opened the door just enough to ask, "What do you want?" "I have no desire to see either of you." Bowden's voice was weak as he answered, "I'm sorry, Aini. Could you lend me some money? I lost my job, and the woman, she left me. I don't even have enough money for food." I looked at the man who was once my husband kneeling outside my door, desperately begging for food, and I couldn't help feeling a bit of satisfaction. This was the man who had betrayed me, who had tried to deceive me, who had said terrible things about me behind my back. And now, he was kneeling at my feet, begging for mercy. My mother-in-law, looking equally defeated, gently cut in, "I've divorced my husband too. I'm bankrupt. Please, Aini, we're begging you." She was in tears, but that didn't evoke any sympathy from me. I crossed my arms and responded emotionlessly, "Too bad. I have absolutely no obligation to help either of you. Even if I did, I wouldn't lift a finger. Now leave." They stood there for a moment, speechless, before slinking away. After they left, I took a large handful of salt and sprinkled it on the threshold to cleanse my house of their negative energy. It was like a final step in closing the door to that part of my life forever. 6 months after the Hawaii event, my life had completely changed. I had used part of the divorce settlement money to buy a small apartment in the city, away from the memories of my failed marriage. And with Kalista's encouragement, I had gathered the courage to pursue my long-forgotten passion for music. I started performing at local cafes on weekends, gently embracing dreams I had once thought I wasn't brave enough to chase. I no longer dreamed of becoming a global star, but I found joy in simply being able to sing. It was a wonderfully liberating feeling. Kalista visited me often, and we had become true best friends. After everything that had happened, I thought I was lucky to have found a genuine friendship amidst the ruins of that terrible marriage. Occasionally, I still heard news about Bowden through mutual acquaintances. He had to move to another city after the scandal, and from what I knew, he was doing odd jobs to make a living. Evelyn, my former mother-in-law, seemed to have completely disappeared from society after divorcing her husband. And Jane, the woman Bowden had cheated with, quickly abandoned him after having to pay compensation to me. One day, while cleaning my new apartment, I found an old photo of Bowden and me from our early dating days. I looked at the young, happy, and innocent face of myself, and felt a strange pity. Not for Bowden, but for that young girl in the photo, a girl who had been willing to give up her dreams and accept a life she didn't really want, just to please others. I placed the photo in a box along with other memories of that marriage, and tucked it away in the back of my closet. It was a part of my life I didn't want to forget, but also didn't need to look at every day. Sometimes, when I think about everything that happened, I feel a bit of sadness. But most of the time, I feel grateful. Grateful that I discovered the truth before it was too late. Grateful that I found the strength to stand up for myself. And grateful that, after everything, I found my way back to music and to myself. My marriage may have ended in tears and betrayal, but from those ashes, a new Aini arose, stronger, wiser, and finally free to pursue the life she truly wanted. And the best thing about it all? I no longer feel the need to apologize for being myself. Every time I sing on stage now, I can't help but think about that fateful moment in Hawaii, the moment I caught my husband with his mistress, the moment my life changed forever. And I smile, knowing that sometimes, the worst things can lead to the best things. It's the oldest truth. Sometimes you have to be pushed to the edge, to lose everything, before you can find yourself again. And I did find myself. Finally, after everything, I found myself.